I'm Edward 38 male. I'm an architect, a man who finds comfort in blueprints, straight lines, and the predictable integrity of steel and concrete. My life until recently was built on that same principle of order, a carefully designed structure I shared with my wife Isabella in our quiet suburban home. I believed our foundation was solid, built on a decade of shared trust. I was wrong. I never imagined that the person I shared my life with was secretly drafting a plan for its demolition, all for the sake of her deadbeat brother and a luxury sports car. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My world is one of precision. As an architect, I live by tolerances measured in millimeters. A misplaced beam or a miscalculation in load-bearing capacity can bring a whole structure crashing down. I applied that same philosophy to my life. Everything had its place, a purpose. My career was stable and rewarding. My finances were meticulously managed, with spreadsheets for everything from retirement savings to our weekly grocery budget. My marriage to Isabella, I thought, was the central pillar supporting it all. We had been married for 10 years, and from the outside, we were the picture of suburban success. I was the quiet, analytical one. She was the vibrant, charismatic one. A real estate agent, Isabella could charm anyone. She had a laugh that filled a room and an energy that drew people in. I used to think we balanced each other perfectly, my logical mind and her social grace. We were a team. Our life was comfortable, a predictable rhythm of work, quiet evenings, and weekend get-togethers with friends. The only variable, the one element that never quite fit into my orderly plans, was Isabella's younger brother, Leo. At 25, Leo was a man perpetually chasing a shortcut to success. He drifted from one get-rich-quick scheme to the next, each one more ridiculous than the last. There was the drop-shipping business that somehow lost money, the cryptocurrency he invested in a day before it crashed, and his latest, most enduring venture, becoming a social media influencer. He had a modest following, mostly attracted by his flashy rented lifestyle. He'd post pictures with luxury cars that weren't his and in front of mansions he was just visiting, crafting a narrative of success that had absolutely no foundation in reality. I found it pathetic, but Isabella saw it as ambition. She was fiercely protective of him, always ready with an excuse for his failures and a handout from our joint account to fund his next fantasy. I tolerated Leo for Isabella's sake. I'd listen with a patient smile as he explained his latest brilliant idea, nodding along while my mind calculated the statistical probability of its failure. The requests for money were frequent, usually small amounts, a few hundred here for camera equipment, 1,000 there for a marketing course. I always voiced my disapproval, but Isabella would frame it as supporting family. "He just needs a little push, Edward," she'd say. "Once he gets his big break, he'll pay us back for everything." I knew he wouldn't, but I let it go to keep the peace. It was easier to part with a small amount of money than to endure the days of tense silence that followed any argument about her brother. The quiet before the storm began about 6 months ago. The tension around Leo had escalated. He had apparently identified his next big move, one that required more than just a few $100s. Isabella started dropping hints, testing the waters. "Leo's content is getting so much attention," she said one evening over dinner. "He says all the big influencers have a signature car, it's part of their brand." I just hummed in response, focusing on my meal. I refused to engage. A few nights later, she was more direct. "He's found the perfect car," she said, her voice bright with forced enthusiasm. "It's an investment, really, the kind of car that would get him into exclusive events, attract major brand deals." I finally put my fork down and looked at her. "Isabella, we are not buying your brother a car. The conversation ends there." The argument that followed was worse than usual. She accused me of being unsupportive, of looking down on her family. She claimed I was cold and unfeeling, that I didn't understand the importance of dreams. "You deal in concrete and glass, Edward," she yelled. "You don't get it. Some people need to take risks." I stood my ground. "Risks are calculated, Isabella. This is not a risk. It's a fantasy financed by our hard work. We have real financial goals. A house renovation, our trip to Italy next year. We are not setting fire to our savings so Leo can pretend to be a millionaire on the internet." She stormed out of the room, and the chill between us lasted for nearly a week. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I had laid down the law, that my logic had for once won out over her emotional appeals. I believed the matter was settled. Life returned to its normal rhythm. Isabella became her usual cheerful self. She apologized for the fight, saying she was just stressed and worried about Leo. I accepted her apology, relieved that the conflict was over. I was a fool. I saw the restored peace as a victory for common sense. In reality, it was just the eerie calm that settles in before the hurricane makes landfall. She hadn't given up on the dream. She had just given up on convincing me to be a part of it. In the weeks following our big argument, a strange sort of normalcy returned to our home, but it was a fragile, artificial peace. Looking back, all the signs were there, like subtle stress fractures in a foundation that I was too complacent to notice. Isabella was warmer, almost overly affectionate, as if she were trying to compensate for the rift that had opened between us. She stopped talking about Leo entirely, a topic that had once dominated our conversations. I mistook this for acceptance. I thought she had finally seen the irrationality of his demands and had chosen our financial security, our future, over his fleeting whims. It was a comforting thought, and I clung to it because the alternative was too unsettling to consider. Her compliance was a performance, and I was its sole, unsuspecting audience. The true betrayal was not a single act but a carefully orchestrated campaign of deception. It began with her becoming more secretive with her phone, angling the screen away from me whenever I entered the room. When I'd ask who she was texting, she'd wave a dismissive hand and say, "Just a client with a million questions," or "My mom, you know how she is." She took calls on the back patio, her voice a low, urgent murmur carried away by the evening breeze. I registered these things on a subconscious level, but I never allowed myself to become suspicious. She was a real estate agent. Her job involved constant communication and delicate negotiations. It was easy to explain away her behavior. Trust is a powerful sedative. It dulls the senses and encourages you to see what you want to see. I wanted to see a wife dedicated to her career, not one conspiring behind my back. The centerpiece of her plan was executed with chilling precision one Tuesday evening. I was buried in work, spread out on the dining room table with blueprints for a new commercial complex. My deadline was looming, and my mind was a maze of support columns, HVAC systems, and zoning regulations. Isabella approached me with a stack of envelopes and a pen. "Hey, honey, sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Just some household stuff we need to get sorted. Can you sign these?" I barely looked up. She fanned the documents out in front of me. On top was an update to our home insurance policy, which I recognized. Below it was a renewal form for our car insurance. Standard, boring domestic paperwork. "Just here and here," she said, pointing to the signature lines. Distracted and wanting to get back to my work, I did something I have never done before or since. I didn't read every word. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? This was Isabella, my wife, my partner. I scribbled my signature on the two forms she indicated. As I was capping the pen, she slid one more paper forward from the bottom of the stack. "Oh, and this one, it's for the bank, just a confirmation of our account details for the mortgage." The page was mostly blank, a standard banking form with several boxes and lines, but my eyes were tired and the jargon swam before me. I saw the bank's logo at the top, and again I just signed where her finger was pointing. My signature, my name, my bond, given away in a moment of inattention, offered up on the altar of a trust she had already decided to shatter. I now know that final document was a blank cosigner application form. All it needed was my signature. The rest could be filled in later. A couple of weeks after that, Leo's social media presence exploded. Suddenly, his posts featured a gleaming, ridiculously expensive sports car, a machine that cost more than my first condo. He posed with it in front of every landmark in the city, the captions filled with hashtags like hustle, grind, and success. A knot of irritation tightened in my stomach every time I saw it. I asked Isabella about it, trying to keep my tone casual. "Looks like Leo finally found a rich fool to invest in his brand," I said. She didn't even look up from her laptop. "I told you he had potential," she replied coolly. "Someone saw it." The someone she was referring to, of course, was me. She had made me the fool. She had taken my name, my credit, my financial identity, and handed it over to her reckless brother so he could play act as a tycoon. She had forged my signature not by tracing it, but by stealing it under false pretenses and applying it to a document I never would have approved. The ink on that loan application was a testament to her betrayal, a permanent stain on the life I thought we had built together. While I was designing buildings meant to last for a century, my own wife was busy engineering the collapse of our marriage, and I hadn't seen a thing. Life continued its placid course for another 3 months. The sports car became a recurring character in our lives, a silent, gleaming symbol of my irritation and Isabella's secret triumph. She'd point out Leo's latest post, her voice filled with manufactured pride. "Look, honey, he got a brand partnership with an energy drink. It's all happening for him." I'd offer a non-committal grunt, my resentment a bitter taste in my mouth. I assumed he was making the payments, that his influencer fantasy was somehow, against all odds, generating enough income to cover the loan he'd conned someone into giving him. It was annoying, but it wasn't my problem. My name wasn't on any loan. My finances were secure. I retreated further into my work, finding solace in its logic and order. The world of architecture made sense. Stress loads could be calculated, materials had predictable breaking points, and foundations were either stable or they were not. There were no hidden clauses or emotional manipulations in a blueprint. The illusion was shattered on a gray, drizzly Thursday afternoon. I came home from a site visit, tired and splattered with a bit of mud, looking forward to a hot shower and a quiet evening. Tucked into our mailbox amongst the usual junk mail and a utility bill was a rigid official-looking envelope. It was a certified letter requiring a signature upon receipt, but the mail carrier had simply left the pickup slip. I frowned. I hadn't ordered anything, and I wasn't expecting any legal documents. My first thought was that it was related to one of my building projects, perhaps a notice from the City Planning Commission. I drove to the post office before it closed, my curiosity piqued. The clerk handed over the crisp white envelope. The return address was for a collections agency I'd never heard of, acting on behalf of a premium auto finance corporation. A cold feeling, a prickle of unexplained dread began to creep up my spine. This had to be a mistake, some kind of administrative error. I waited until I got back to my car to open it. I slit the envelope with my car key, my hands suddenly feeling clumsy. The letter inside was dense with legal terminology, but certain words jumped out at me sharp and brutal. Final notice, intent to repossess, delinquent payments. And then I saw the vehicle description, the exact make and model of the sports car Leo had been flaunting. My confusion deepened, turning into a sickening dread. This had to be for Leo. They must have sent it to our address by mistake because he'd used it on some form in the past. But then I saw my own name. Not just my name, but my full legal name listed clearly and unmistakably under the heading, Primary Cosigner. My eyes scanned down the page, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I saw the loan amount. It was a breathtaking number, a sum that could cripple us financially for years. It was more than the down payment we had saved for our first house. And next to it, the amount overdue, 3 months of payments plus penalties and fees. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The rain drumming on the car roof faded into a dull roar in my ears. It felt like I had stepped on what I thought was solid ground, only to find myself plunging into an abyss. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. Cosigner, I had explicitly, angrily, and repeatedly refused. I had never been to that dealership. I had never signed any such document. A mistake, it had to be a mistake. A typo, a clerical error, a case of mistaken identity. Any explanation was better than the one that was beginning to form in the dark corners of my mind, the one that featured my wife's smiling face. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely unlock it. I dialed Isabella's number. She answered on the third ring, her voice breezy and professional. "Hey, honey, just finishing up with a client. What's up?" I struggled to keep my voice even. "Isabella. I just received a letter, a repo notice for a car, for Leo's car." There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line, a hesitation that was so small but so profound it confirmed my worst fears. "Oh, that," she said, her voice a little too light, a little too casual. "It's just a mix-up. Leo said he missed one payment, but he's sorting it out. Don't worry about it." "One payment?" I said, my voice rising. "Isabella, this notice says 3 months overdue. It says I'm the cosigner. Why does it say I'm the cosigner?" Her voice started to fray at the edges. "It was just a formality, Edward. The dealership needed someone with establish. Ed credit on the application. It was no big deal. Leo is handling it." "No big deal," I was almost shouting now, oblivious to the people walking past my car in the post office parking lot. "You put my name on a 6-figure loan without my permission. Did you sign my name?" The line went quiet again. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, stripped of all its usual confidence. I knew you'd say no," she whispered. But it was so important to him. The confession, as pathetic as it was, hit me with the force of a physical blow. The letter in my hand was no longer just a piece of paper. It was a verdict. It was the wreckage of my marriage, delivered by the U.S. Postal Service. The drive home was a blur. The familiar streets of our neighborhood seemed alien, as if I were seeing them for the first time through the eyes of a stranger. The man who had left the house that morning was gone, replaced by someone hollowed out by betrayal. When I walked through the door, the house felt different too. The photos on the mantle of me and Isabella, smiling on vacation in our wedding attire, seemed like relics from another life. Every object, every piece of furniture felt like a prop in a play I no longer had a part in. Isabella arrived an hour later. She must have seen the storm on my face the moment she walked in because her cheerful facade crumbled instantly. She started talking before she even set her purse down, a torrent of excuses, justifications, and pathetic apologies. "I was going to tell you," she pleaded, her eyes wide and tearful. "Leo promised me he would make every single payment on time. He swore it. This was supposed to be his big chance, and I couldn't let your negativity ruin it for him." Her words were just noise. The fact that she was trying to blame my negativity for her own calculated deception was so insulting it was almost surreal. "You committed a crime, Isabella," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You committed fraud. You took my name, the one thing a person truly owns, and you used it to indebt me for the rest of my life, for him, for a car." The fight that ensued was the ugliest of our lives. It was a demolition, tearing down 10 years of shared history with every shouted accusation and tearful confession. She admitted everything. She admitted to taking the blank form I'd signed, filling it out with my financial details which she had easy access to, and taking it to the dealership. She had forged my signature on the final contract, practicing it for days until it was a near-perfect match. She had done it all with a clear mind, convinced that the ends justified the means. By the end of it, I felt nothing but a cold, vast emptiness. The love I had for her had been replaced by a chilling combination of pity and disgust. That night, I packed a bag and moved into the guest room. The king-sized bed we had shared for a decade felt like a crime scene. The next morning, I woke up with a singular, icy purpose. Grief and shock had crystallized into anger. I wasn't going to be a victim in this story. I was an architect. I solved problems, and this was the biggest structural problem I had ever faced. I sat at the guest room desk, the repo notice spread out before me. I found the name of the dealership and the auto lender. My first call was to the finance department of the dealership. I was polite but firm. I spoke to a junior employee and explained that I was calling about a fraudulent loan opened in my name. The employee put me on hold. A few minutes later, a man with a slick, overly confident voice came on the line. "Mr. Henderson speaking, I'm the finance manager. I understand you have a concern about your account." I laid it out for him, my voice devoid of emotion. "Mr. Henderson, my name is Edward. I have a letter here stating I am the co-signer on a loan for a vehicle purchased at your dealership. I am informing you that I never authorized this loan. I never visited your dealership. I never signed any documents. My signature was forged, which constitutes a felony. I will be filing a police report for identity theft and contacting my attorney this afternoon to begin proceedings against your company for gross negligence and fraud." There was a brief, stunned silence on the other end. Henderson's smooth demeanor cracked. "Now hold on, let's not be hasty," he stammered. "I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. Mrs. Isabella handled all the paperwork. She assured us everything was in order." "Did you meet me?" I pressed. "Did you witness me sign the documents as is legally required?" He started to bluster, talking about their standard procedures, but he never answered the question. I cut him off. "I expect your full cooperation. I'm ending this call now to contact the authorities." And I hung up. I sat there, my heart hammering, but I felt a sliver of control for the first time in 24 hours. I had drawn a line in the sand. An hour went by, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, the notification popped up. I pressed play. The voice that came through my speaker was completely different from the one I had just spoken to. It was panicked, breathless, and dripping with guilt. "Mr. Edward, this is Marcus Henderson from the dealership. Please call me back. We can sort this out. Look, your wife was very persuasive. The commission on that car was significant. I admit I might have bent the rules a little. I didn't verify the cosigner in person. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. But filing a police report will ruin me. It'll ruin the dealership. There has to be another way. Just call me. We can fix this, please." I saved the voicemail. I saved it twice. I emailed a copy to myself. This wasn't just a confession. It was a weapon. It was the key piece of evidence, the voice of guilt that would become the cornerstone of the new structure I was about to build, my path to justice. The voicemail changed everything. It shifted the ground beneath my feet, transforming me from a victim of circumstance into the architect of what was to come. The raw, desperate panic in Mr. Henderson's voice was the sound of leverage. It was the sound of a man who knew he was caught, a man who had gambled his career on a big commission and lost. The initial shock of Isabella's betrayal had left me feeling powerless, adrift in a sea of emotional wreckage. But now, holding this digital recording of Henderson's confession, I felt a resurgence of my old self. I am a man who designs blueprints. I create order out of chaos. It was time to draw up a new one. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of cold, focused activity. I did not speak to Isabella. I avoided her texts and her tearful calls. When she knocked on the guest room door, I remained silent until she went away. Emotion was a liability I couldn't afford. I needed to operate with the same dispassionate precision I brought to my work. My first step was to find legal counsel. I didn't want a divorce lawyer, not yet. I needed someone who specialized in fraud and contract law. A quick search of the top firms in the city led me to a woman named Sarah Jenkins. Her online profile was formidable, sharp, experienced, with a reputation for being a relentless litigator. She was exactly what I needed. I scheduled a consultation for the following day. Walking into Sarah Jenkins's office felt like stepping onto solid ground for the first time since I'd opened that letter. She was in her early 40s with an intelligent gaze and an air of no-nonsense competence. I laid out the story from the beginning methodically, presenting the facts as if I were describing a client's project brief. I showed her the repo notice. I explained the confrontation with Isabella. And then I played the voicemail from Mr. Henderson. As the recording played, a slow smile spread across Sarah's face. When it finished, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me. "Edward," she said, "some lawyers wait their entire careers for a piece of evidence this perfect. This isn't just a smoking gun, this is the entire munitions factory. Mr. Henderson has not only confessed to his own negligence, but has also implicated your wife and the dealership in a conspiracy to commit fraud." She spent the next hour laying out my options, sketching them out on a legal pad like I would sketch out a floor plan. We had two paths, the criminal and the civil. The criminal path involved filing a police report for identity theft and forgery. It would be messy, public, and could potentially land both Isabella and Leo in jail. The civil path involved suing the dealership and Henderson for the full amount of the loan, plus damages for the harm to my credit and emotional distress. Sarah explained that the two paths were not mutually exclusive. The threat of criminal charges, she explained, her eyes glinting, is an incredibly powerful tool in a civil negotiation. This was the moment my blueprint began to take shape. My objective wasn't just to extricate myself from the fraudulent loan. That was the bare minimum. My objective was accountability. I wanted every single person who had a hand in this deception to face the consequences of their actions. I didn't want to destroy them, but I wanted them to understand the gravity of what they had done. I wanted them to feel the weight of their choices. Over the next week, Sarah and I worked to assemble our case. I gathered every piece of relevant documentation, years of my financial records, examples of my true signature from dozens of legal documents, bank statements showing the small, consistent loans to Leo that established a pattern of his financial dependency. I combed through Leo's social media, archiving every post where he bragged about the car, every caption that screamed of unearned success. It was a portrait of a con artist, and Isabella was his willing accomplice. Sarah drafted the initial legal filing. A blistering complaint detailing the fraud in meticulous detail. But we didn't file them, not yet. That wasn't part of the plan was surgical. It was designed for maximum impact with minimal collateral damage to my own peace of mind. I didn't want a protracted court battle that would drag on for years. I wanted a swift, decisive resolution, a controlled demolition. Phase 1 was complete. We had the evidence, we had the legal strategy, and we had the leverage. Now, it was time to arrange the meeting where I would present my terms. It was time to show them the blueprint for their reckoning. The meeting was set for a Friday afternoon at Sarah Jenkins's law firm. The conference room was on a high floor, with a panoramic view of the city skyline, a landscape of steel and glass structures that I knew intimately. It felt fitting. I was here to deconstruct one part of my life so I could begin to build another. Sarah had sent formal letters to Isabella, Leo, and Mr. Henderson, inviting them to a meeting to discuss a pre-litigation resolution regarding the fraudulent auto loan. She made it clear that their attendance was in their best interest. All three confirmed they would be there. I arrived early, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. I wanted to project an aura of unshakable control. When they were led into the room, their appearances spoke volumes. Mr. Henderson, the slick finance manager, looked pale and haggard, his expensive suit seeming to hang off his frame. Leo, stripped of his social media bravado, just looked like a scared kid, fidgeting with his phone and refusing to make eye contact. And Isabella, she looked broken. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and she flinched when she looked at me. A part of me, a ghost of the man who had loved her, felt a pang of pity. I crushed it. Pity had no place in this room. They sat on one side of the long mahogany table. I sat on the other, with Sarah beside me. The silence was heavy, thick with guilt and apprehension. Isabella was the first to speak, her voice trembling. "Edward, can we just talk? Please, we can fix this. We can sell the car, we can." I held up a hand and she fell silent. "There will be no we," I said, my voice as cold and hard as polished stone. "You forfeited the right to that word. This is not a discussion. This is not a negotiation. Today, you are all going to listen." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, attempting to regain some of his professional composure. "My client, the dealership, is prepared to make a generous offer to compensate you for any inconvenience, Mr. Edward. We can clear the loan and offer a cash settlement to resolve this matter quietly." Leo, finding a sliver of courage, chimed in. "Yeah, man, I'm so sorry. I can get a job. I can pay you back every penny." I let their pathetic offers hang in the air for a moment before I looked at Sarah. She gave a slight nod. "My inconvenience, as you call it, Mr. Henderson, is a federal crime," I stated flatly, "and paying me back, Leo, doesn't erase the forgery." I then nodded to Sarah, who placed a sleek tablet in the center of the table. "Before we discuss the terms of this resolution," she said, her voice crisp and authoritative, "I think it's important for everyone to be on the same page regarding the evidence." She tapped the screen, and from the tablet speaker, Mr. Henderson's panicked, whining voice filled the room. "I admit I might have bent the rules a little. Filing a police report will ruin me." Henderson sank in his chair, his face turning a blotchy red. Leo stared at the tablet as if it were a snake. Isabella closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. When the recording finished, I leaned forward. "That is Exhibit A," I said. "A full confession, and we have so much more." Sarah slid a thick folder across the table. "In this folder," she explained, "you will find a draft of the civil complaint we are prepared to file, naming the dealership, Mr. Henderson personally, and you, Isabella, as co-conspirators in a scheme to commit fraud. You will also find a copy of the police report for identity theft and forgery that is filled out and ready to be submitted. These are the consequences you are facing." The three of them stared at the folder, their faces ashen. The power in the room was entirely mine. "However," I continued, "I am an architect. I prefer to build things rather than destroy them, so I have designed a solution, a blueprint for how we move forward. If you agree to every single one of these terms, right now, that folder remains on this table. If any of you refuse, my lawyer will file those documents before you even reach the lobby." I laid out my terms, each one a precise, non-negotiable point. 1. The dealership will immediately and in full absorb the entire loan. The vehicle will be surrendered and the debt will be erased. I want a signed letter from the CEO confirming this, along with confirmation that this fraudulent loan has been completely expunged from my credit history, with all three major credit bureaus. 2. Mr. Henderson, you will tender your resignation, effective immediately. I want a copy of that resignation letter. Your career in auto finance is over. 3. Isabella and Leo, you will both sign a legally binding confession drafted by my lawyer detailing your roles in this forgery. I will hold this document. It will be my insurance policy. If either of you ever steps out of line again, it goes straight to the district attorney. 4. Isabella, I will be filing for divorce on the grounds of fraud. You will not contest it. You will not seek alimony. You will walk away with what you brought into this marriage and nothing more. The confession you are about to sign will make any challenge to this futile." The room was deathly quiet. I looked at each of them in turn, my gaze unwavering. There was no argument, no pushback. They knew they were trapped. They had built their own cage, and I had just locked the door. One by one, they nodded their consent. The day of reckoning had arrived, not with a fiery explosion, but with the quiet, devastating click of a well-laid trap. The aftermath of that meeting was swift and clinical. With Sarah Jenkins overseeing every detail, the terms of my blueprint were executed with absolute precision. Within a week, I received a formal letter from the CEO of the auto dealership group. It contained a profuse apology and a legally binding confirmation that the loan had been paid in full by the company and that all records of it had been purged from my credit files. Enclosed with it was a copy of Mr. Henderson's signed resignation. Leo surrendered the sports car, his brief fantasy of a high-flying life coming to an unceremonious end. The last I heard, he was working a low-wage job to help pay for his own lawyer, a consequence of the legal advice he sought after signing his confession. The most difficult part was dismantling my life with Isabella. She signed the divorce papers without a word of protest. The confession I held gave her no choice. Our shared house, the one I had meticulously helped design, suddenly felt like a museum of a failed life. We put it on the market immediately. The process of separating our lives was like a careful demolition. We divided assets, closed joint accounts, and sorted through a decade of accumulated possessions. Each photo album and piece of furniture was a reminder of the life I thought I had, the partnership I believed was real. There were moments of profound sadness, not for the woman Isabella had become, but for the woman I thought she was. I was mourning a ghost. She tried to talk to me a few times during the process to explain herself again, to seek some kind of forgiveness. I refused to listen. Forgiveness was a luxury I could not afford. Forgiveness would imply that the structural damage could be patched over, but I knew better. The foundation was compromised beyond repair. The divorce was finalized in a matter of months. Isabella moved to a small apartment across town, her career as a real estate agent tarnished by the rumors that inevitably seeped out. I never used the confession against her beyond ensuring the divorce was clean and swift, but its existence was a shadow she would have to live with. As for me, once the house was sold, I moved into a modern, minimalist apartment downtown with a view of the city skyline I loved so much. I purged my life of everything that reminded me of my past. I bought new furniture, new dishes, new everything. It was a fresh start, a blank slate. In the quiet solitude of my new life, I had time to reflect. The betrayal had been a brutal, traumatic event, but in its wake, it had forced a necessary clarity. I realized that my obsession with order and control had made me blind. I had built a life that looked perfect on paper, a perfect blueprint, but I had neglected to inspect the quality of the materials. I had trusted in an image, a facade, without ever truly testing the integrity of the person I was building it with. My old life wasn't a fortress of stability, it was a house of cards, and Isabella's desperate act had been the gust of wind that brought it all down. The pain of it was immense, but so was the liberation that followed. It's been a year now, I've found a new rhythm. My work has flourished as I've poured my energy into creating structures that are honest, functional, and built to last. I find peace in the certainty of my profession. I've reconnected with old friends and even started dating casually, though with a new sense of caution. I am more guarded, but I am also more authentic. I no longer strive for the picture-perfect life. I strive for a true one. Sometimes from my apartment window, I look out at the city I've helped build, at the buildings standing tall and strong against the sky. I used to think my life was like them. Now I know that a person's foundation isn't built with steel or concrete. It's built with truth, honesty, and self-respect. My old structure had to be demolished, razed to the ground so that I could clear the rubble and start again. This time, I'm building on a foundation of truth, and it's a structure that no one but me can ever tear down.